and for the feedback. Max, I'll give you the floor.
I'm sorry.
You're number one, I believe. Let me just check my notes.
That's fine.
Indeed, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Max Maelstrom, and I'm presenting on residential demand for sediment remediation to restore water quality. And what I'm going to do in this presentation is provide some estimates of household willingness to pay to restore water quality. And I'm going to do that using a sorting model. And I'm going to take advantage of the sorting model to look for evidence that there may be disparities in willingness to pay between different demographic groups. And I'm going to do that with an application to cleanup action in Milwaukee. And what's nice about that cleanup action in terms of my research design is that I can use data from before and after the cleanup action in terms of where are people buying their homes, how much are they paying for their homes. And the cleanup action took place in just one part of Milwaukee, and there are other parts that are still suffering from water quality problems. And so I have kind of this treated and comparison group that I can take advantage of. All right, so that's why I'm focusing on Milwaukee, but Milwaukee is not unique in terms of its water quality problems, especially in the Great Lakes. There are many locations around the Great Lakes region and along the Atlantic and Pacific and Gulf Coast that are suffering from pollution problems. And well, if you know anything about the Great Lakes, you probably know that they at one time suffered from some really bad water quality. And in the 1950s, things had gotten so bad, it was used as like an actual dumping ground. There was just oil in the water that newspapers were running headlines saying like the lakes are maybe nearing a tipping point. And if we continue to add pollution, they're going to pass that tipping point, and then we won't be able to recover the ecosystems. And that motivated policymakers to get together and try to come up with some solutions. And one of those solutions is the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement that committed the US and Canada are signatories to this agreement, committed both countries to restoring the Great Lakes. And initially, they did that by focusing policy actions on trying to turn off the pollution taps, so to speak, that you had municipal waste just getting dumped into rivers that flowed into the lakes, or you had industrial waste being dumped into these rivers, like the Milwaukee River. And those efforts were largely successful. If you look at water quality measures across the lakes from the 1970s, the signing of this agreement, water quality has improved dramatically, but not as dramatically in some locations as others. And that's because over the decades of industrial dumping of toxic chemicals, those chemicals wound up in sediments where they continue to be present and they can leach into the water. So there are still some very unsafe areas of water quality. And in response to that kind of growing awareness of we need to deal with these legacy sources of pollution, as they're known, the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement was revised in the 1980s to identify areas of concern to help direct resources to where these legacy pollutants are located, like in Milwaukee. And since the 1980s, the United States and Canada have spent billions of dollars cleaning up these areas. And Milwaukee is one of those areas. Here is a map. Here's Milwaukee. The Milwaukee area of concern is known as the Milwaukee Estuary area of concern. I'll show you a map in a second. A zoom in of that. But there are, or were 43 areas of concern. A number of them have been delisted, but most of them have kind of undergone a partial cleanup process. So an area of concern is defined as a location that's not supporting at least 1 out of 14 beneficial uses, which are basically like a list of ecosystem services that an area should be supporting. In Milwaukee, there are 10 out of 14 that it's currently not supporting. And most of those have to do with concentrations of polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, which you probably know are a human and environmental health risk. Well, since the development of areas of concern, economists have been looking into what the benefits would be of restoring these areas. And what I want you to take away from this list of papers in the academic literature on the benefits of restoration is most of them are using some variety of hedonic analysis. Basically, looking at home sale prices and how they may correlate with distance to an area of concern. And the idea is living near these areas is undesirable, so we'd expect home prices to decline as you move closer to the area of concern. And the papers that do hedonic analysis find this, either using actual home sales data or hypothetical home sales data from like choice experiments. And I'm going to do something similar, but not quite identical to that. I'm not going to be using this hedonic standard hedonic approach. I'm going to be using a sorting model, but I'm still interested in where are people buying their homes and how much are they paying for the homes and how that may relate to the distance from the Milwaukee area of concern. But as I mentioned at the start, there was also this cleanup action that took place, and I want to use that cleanup action as to provide some exogenous variation in water quality, because the area of concern isn't just a polluted area. There may be also still beneficial uses that it continues to provide that people enjoy. They don't like the pollution, for example, but they may still appreciate the aesthetic benefits associated with the area. And in addition to that contribution to measuring the benefits of restoration, I'm also going to look at potential disparities in who benefits from restoration. Here are two maps of Milwaukee and the area of concern boundary. It includes the nearshore harbor area of Milwaukee and then three major tributaries, the Milwaukee River, the Menominee River, and the Kinnickinnic River. And the map on the left, it has two different colors. The red color shows the original boundaries as it was designated in the 1980s. And in 2008, the boundary was extended up the Milwaukee and Menominee rivers. Why was it extended? Because there was growing realization that the contaminants in the lower estuary, in part, were due to sources of contamination upstream. And so that's what I'm going to be looking at is a cleanup action that took place upstream in the middle of that red circle. That's an area of the river known as Lincoln Park. Lots of contaminants there because there's a sharp bend in the river. So sediments tended to accumulate over time, contaminated sediments. And there was also a dam that has since been removed, but there was a dam that also served to basically stock up contaminated sediments. Now, if you're gonna clean up a location in a stream, yeah, you're cleaning up the water there, but you're also going to be cleaning up the water downstream. And so the treated area, as I'm going to use it here in this presentation, is going to run downstream from that cleanup area, or that remediation area, until it reaches the beginning of the lower part of the estuary. I've done some sensitivity analyses of, what if I define the treated area as further downstream, like all the way to Lake Michigan. I don't find as strong evidence that there are cleanup benefits or benefits of cleanup further downstream. It's not that they may not be benefiting at all. It just may be that there are other concerns home buyers have when it comes to purchasing homes closer to Lake Michigan. I'm going to develop a sorting model to explain location decisions. So in the sorting model, I'm trying to analyze what locations people are buying their homes in. I define the location as a census tract, and I'm going to pull data on home buying in the year before, or actually the year that remediation began, and then the period just after cleanup ended. So the year after cleanup ended. So I'm going to look at home buying the year before and the year after cleanup occurred. And in the sorting model, I'm trying to explain utility as a function of home characteristics and then neighborhood characteristics. What I'm really interested in are those neighborhood characteristics in terms of how close a home is, or a neighborhood is, a census tract is rather, a census tract is to the area of concern. And especially the part of the area of concern that got cleaned up. So the treatment effect, which is this third term on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, right-hand side of the screen, that's the treat times post divided by this D. So what is that? Treat is an indicator variable for whether or not a home, the point on the area of concern that it's closest to, is that a point that would have been affected by the remediation action? The post is, okay, were you buying your home after remediation? And then the D is a measure of distance from the center of a tract to the closest point in the area of concern. So the idea is you could think of this as sort of like a difference in differences specification, but the treatment effect could, will attenuate with distance. The farther away you are, the smaller the treatment effect, which is basically consistent with what the prior hedonic literature has been showing. Initially, I estimate the sorting model without any preference heterogeneity, and then I estimate a specification with preference heterogeneity. I allow those these effects to vary across three different variables. Include indicators for whether or not the home buyer is Black or Hispanic, and then I also include a variable for their income. So the idea there is I want to look to see if the buying behavior of, say, the predominantly white group is different from the buying behavior of Black and Hispanics. Okay, so two important sources of data here. One comes from the city of Milwaukee, their home sales. So I have information about the price of a home, where it's located, all of its characteristics. Doesn't tell me anything about the buyers though. So I go to the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act records. So I know about home buyers. I don't know exactly what home they're buying, but I do know what census tract it's in. So that's why I define locations at the census tract level. I know the characteristics of buyers at that level. And then I use data from, actually, this is a little bit of a mistake. So I can estimate the model with 2011, 2016 data, which bounds the cleanup action. It took several years to clean up that sort of part of the river. But actually the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data, I can't get it further past 2012 because census tract boundaries changed past that time. So actually, when I use the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act records, I use the 2012 data. Important empirical issue is the endogeneity of home prices. So I need to have home price as a variable in the location model, since that's going to be a big determinant of where people buy their homes, but it's going to be endogenous. There are a couple of strategies in the literature that I'm not going to use. I instead just use a control function, which seemed easier than the approaches that you may have read about in the literature that may involve some intricate type of estimation techniques. So the control function is basically me just taking a reduced form price regression, and then in that regression I include several instruments for the factors that can influence home prices, but shouldn't influence the utility from living in a particular location. So that's why I'm using variables describing the housing market or the way land is used in Milwaukee, but how it's used far away from the location in which a person could be buying a home. And I won't go into any more details other than to say that the instruments are statistically significant. All right, since I think I only have a few moments, I won't go into describing the data. Other than you could do a really basic difference in differences analysis just using the way that I've summarized the data here. So you can see some evidence of home prices that have increased near the cleanup area, but not in other parts of Milwaukee. All right, I'm going to run through a few specifications, the way in which these specifications differ in terms of the fixed effects that they include. So the treatment effect, initially with no fixed effects, it's positive, which is what I would have expected, but it's not statistically significant. Let me also mention that this distance index is also positive, which is actually contrary to my expectations and contrary to everything that's been done in the past. The literature that's been published has always found these negative price gradients with respect to living near the area of concern. don't find that in Milwaukee. People generally prefer to live near the water in Milwaukee. So it's different than what other people have found. But it's a surprise, but not totally, it's explainable. People may like the aesthetic benefits of the Milwaukee River or living near Lake Michigan there. All right, in any case, once I start adding fixed effects, the effect I'm interested in is moving towards statistically significant. All right. I also do a placebo test in which I look at a part of the area of concern that was not cleaned up. There was no remediation activity. And I find that effect is not positive nor significant. So if you were concerned that maybe the effect I was picking up before is because maybe people just wanted to live closer to the river overall, regardless of cleanup between those 2 years, that's not what I'm finding. I looked at the change in the demand to live near the Menominee River, and it didn't change over this period. So it seems like the change that did occur is due to the water quality improvement. Okay, now here's where I'm looking for evidence of disparities in willingness to pay and disparities in benefits. Do we see any evidence of disparities in how people are, where they're moving with respect to the cleanup action? And the answer is basically no. I mean, there could be something going on there, but nothing, it's all very, very imprecisely estimated. So I don't see any difference or any disparity in the cleanup, the treatment effect between race groups or income. Important caveat, though, is that if you look at the measure that I include, the treat times the 1/D measure, so that's trying to account for any difference in the proximity effect in the area that would eventually be cleaned up. There are sharp differences between race and income groups there. So it seems like before cleanup got going, this area, the people who were moving in were predominantly white. They were not Black, they were not Hispanic. Those two groups tended to avoid that area or had a hard time getting into that area. And the households that were moving in tended to be higher income, or higher income households were significantly more likely to move into those areas. Okay, I can use those estimates to calculate willingness to pay. It ranges between $9,000 and $19,000, depending upon the specification. That's within the range of estimates, maybe a little bit on the high end relative to the research that's been done before. And then is there evidence that there's differences in those willingness to pay levels between race and income groups? No, not with respect to the cleanup actions as they occurred. But that's conditional on pre-existing disparities. So it may have been that the area, we didn't see any evidence of disparities in benefits because that area was already relatively hard for people of color or low-income groups to access. So if they can't access it, it would have been hard for me to identify an effect of cleanup on their willingness to pay because they couldn't pay to get in the first place. Yeah, so there wouldn't have been any action on them after the cleanup. Okay. Thank you. Any questions?
I think we have time just for one or two quick questions.
April.
We did this in my backyard because I grew up in Milwaukee.
Okay.
So I wish you had a track map. It would be really cool to see this, like, just to see where the action was, and then like to probably track out and how it moves away.
Yeah.
But you said that you had controlled for overall demand changing in that region, or that you have looked at how demand is changing along the AOC. Can you just speak to that more? Sure. A lot of infrastructure has changed in Milwaukee.
It has.
Milwaukee, my childhood is not in Milwaukee today.
Yeah.
And so, I'm just curious, like, were you able to make sure that it wasn't other infrastructure changes?
Okay.
Along the Milwaukee River?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've had similar questions from reviewers. So here's how I've responded. So on the tract issue, yeah, I can't look at any disparities with respect to the tract, but I can look at using, say, block groups if I don't bring in the demographic data. If I just look at home buying, but not their demographics, I can use the sales data to do that. Actually, the effects are stronger when I use the blocks as a spatial unit. And then in terms of the overall level of downtown development, I can't remember if I did this as like a placebo test or if I included it as an additional control. I looked at the distance of from the centroids of these tracks to the downtown area in case like the redevelopment of the downtown could be driving these effects, because for those who may not be familiar with Milwaukee, the treated area is basically right above downtown, right? So this is the center of the city, and so and this is the treated area. Yeah. Yeah. And so no, it doesn't appear to be, from what I can tell, it doesn't appear to be driven by downtown. But even if it was, I do think some of the development may be partially due to the cleanup actions that have occurred, that the cleanup of or at least the signaling of like water quality is improving, the investments in the river walk, which are related to that. It's all kind of bundled together. So I'm like, that's why I try to be hesitant to say like the cleanup action was directed at PCB. So they removed tens of thousands of pounds, well, not 10,000. I think it was like 10,000 pounds of PCBs from that area. But I hesitate to say that the willingness to pay is actually for the PCB removal. There were a bundle of improvements that occurred that are associated with those PCB removals. There was some habitat restoration. The park area was restored. So, you know, I think the willingness to pay is kind of tied up into all of that. And some of the redevelopment, yeah, too. But I'd love to hear any more insights you have about the Milwaukee area and what's been going on there, because there have been other cleanup actions. There was one that occurred there even before, a smaller one that occurred before the study time that I'm looking at. There's another cleanup action that occurred down there. There are some Superfund sites. Yeah, there's a lot of activity in Milwaukee. Yeah.
I guess we have
Yep. Oh, so that was another question from a reviewer. Okay. So so in the way that I estimated the model, I estimated it as a conditional logit. So because time is like the time factor just gets differenced away when you estimate it as a conditional logit. Okay. But there are some ways that you can estimate these sorting models in which you're not using the conditional logit. You estimate these mean utilities, and then you decompose the mean utilities using just like OLS, and then you would have a time fixed effect. You need to include a time fixed effect. Yeah. So I did it that way, and it didn't make a big difference.
So all of that, then, but you still have 2 years of data.
Yeah.
So the one after, right after the remediation ended.
Yeah, basically a few months after remediation ended, then that's the period that I'm using.
Right, so I'm wondering, so what's the mechanism? When somebody goes to buy a house, like if I buy a house, I would see that information that it was, hey, the river upstream was just cleaned up, right? Now, several years later, that may show up in general classes and just maybe things, but the year right after is like, well, how do the buyers know?
Yeah.
Well, did the sellers tell them, hey, I'm selling the house, I bought it when it was dirty, but now it's clean?
Yeah. 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 So there's a print media that kind of ran stories about cleanup actions in the river. And then there were also online media, like you would have environmental organizations that would promote the actions as like success stories. And so people could learn about it that way.
I wonder if that effect is magnified, like after years after, if you have data, maybe a couple of years after transactions, right? Maybe that became more known and so the prices went up even more.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're pretty businesses, like things that there's like a lot of just like amenities that are really good. And then it's like, oh, that brewery is down there now. Oh, that's awesome. And then people want to walk to the brewery, and like there's just really cool amenities in Milwaukee that didn't used to be there, that are not the river itself, that are there because the river is clean now for I think that might not necessarily be the same on the Milwaukee River as Menominee, but like, as they clean them up, there's like a lot more business activity on the water.
But then one can argue that, well, that's the price effect because of the brewers, which you can have even in the dirty water.
But it wasn't there before the dirty water, or it wasn't there during the dirty water. The businesses are moving back to the river.
Well, that's my point.
But I mean,
That the price increase could be because of the brewery that could have gone there, even if they didn't clean up.
they wouldn't though,
Well,
because it was gross.
you're not in the water.
Well, yeah, so I have not looked at changing that last year. I haven't played around with the last, moving it from like 2016 to 2017. I haven't done that. So I don't know how sensitive the results would be to changing that
It's
year.
already great that you have a positive effect, but it could be even later.
And this is great discussion, but I'm gonna have to, I'm gonna have to jump
Okay.
in here.
Yep.
So that, no one can go, but maybe we'll cycle back, at the very end.
Thanks, everyone.
Make it
Sounds good.
fast.
Sounds good. Wonderful. Thank you. Next.
Hello everyone, I'm Yana Liu, a third-year PhD student from Ohio State. My advisor is Alan Fiber. He's not here, so I'm very relaxed here. I'm happy to talk about my second year paper, which looks at the impact of harmful algal blooms on household working behavior. So before getting there, let me show a picture of what is a harmful algal bloom. So this is a picture talking about the harmful algal bloom in Lake Erie, also the Great Lakes region, several years ago. So you can see all the blue-green nasty thing is algae. And then there is the overgrowth of those algae in the water body. We call it algal bloom. Why we have a harmful here is some algae, they will produce toxins, which are extremely harmful to our body, pets, and they are reported deaths of pets every year because they drink those contaminated water. Since the surface water is our primary water sources, so those harmful algal blooms in the water body would have extremely impact on our drinking water safety. So that's a starting point of my research. Right now, the harmful algal bloom is a major water quality issue across all the states and around the world. It's also a threat to the environment, ecology, local economies, and also the public water safety. And there are lots of efforts that have been made at different levels, like the international are working on that. For example, like the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, Max mentioned that. It's also the harmful algal bloom is a great topic in that agreement. And also the Ohio Senate bill, which they try to manage the farmers' manure application timing. And also the best management practices, which is also a way to address the harmful algal bloom. So for Ohio only, since 2011, they have spent over $3 billion to address the harmful algal bloom in Lake Erie. That's a lot of money, but actually the reality is harmful algal bloom are happening more intensively, frequently, and the extent is increasing as well. So for us, our public water system is quite outdated, and right now there is no current regulation from the federal government or the state government that they try to monitoring or managing the toxins in the drinking waters system. There's no such regulation. So actually we are getting exposed to those algal toxins and we don't even know that. Recently, there is a rising number of water advisories across states. Let me show you a picture. So you can see here's a map. For each state, we have the number of detections of cytotoxins, which is produced by the harmful algal bloom. You can see every state they have experienced some kind of harmful algal bloom, and the black dot in each state mark a recent water advisory caused by the harmful algal bloom. You can see it's everywhere. And there's one case I want to talk about. It is the Placebo Test in the Great Lakes region. It's the largest water crisis caused by harmful algal blooms. So for 500,000 residents in Toledo metropolitan region, they experienced a 3-day do not drink water advisory in 2014. And after that, because it's a very serious issue, the government has spent over $500 million to upgrade their water system. So we are very interested in following the water crisis, what happens to those households? Do they react to those crises, and whether there's any long-term effect there? So we check the weekly expenditure on bottled water. So when during the crisis, because the tap water cannot drink, so people will substitute to bottled water. So we look at the household expenditure on bottled water and let's see what happens. You can see here the which peak here, and it lasts for several weeks. So this is the motivation we have. Households do respond to those events, and that effects will last for much longer time than the event itself. It's only 3 days, but people will react for a longer time. So we go to the literature. We found out that yes, there are a growing number of studies. They look at the harmful algal bloom impacts from different aspects, like the property values, the fishing, and there for different water quality issues. Previous study they have applied the averting behavior model to assess the averting expenditure, but no existing study we found. They try to examine the impacts of harmful algal blooms in terms of their water supply contamination. So we start from this literature gap, and we try to measure the willingness to pay for households to remove those harmful algal blooms in order to maintain safe drinking water. And to do that, we're going to examine the change of household expenditure on bottled water purchase following the drinking water advisory. We particularly look at the Toledo water crisis since it's the most serious one. So the data we're going to apply is the consumer panel data from Nielsen IQ. Nielsen IQ is a very great panel data which record all the purchase data from households, and we also get the demographic and geographic information of these households. And for us, we aggregate the household bi-weekly expenditure on the bottled water for 6 bi-weeks before and after the Toledo event. So since the Toledo event happens in the August 2nd, so we're gonna take this day as the first week, which happens in the bi-week 16. So any bi-weeks after 16, bi-week 16 will be our post-treatment period. So overall, we use a very commonly used method, post-matching DID model, and we also use a second set of empirical estimation, household fixed effect model, but they show very similar results to the post-matching DID. So I will focus on the post-matching DID for today's presentation. So we get started with a very simple baseline DID model. You can see we look at the bi-weekly expenditure on bottled water for household I in county C and county. So we're going to look at the impact of different factors. So the most interesting coefficient we look at is the alpha 1, which is the coefficient on the post-treatment interaction term. And also we add a series of control variables, xi, which include all the demographic information of the household. And we also have a fixed effect, delta C, trying to control the county fixed effect. And alpha 1 will give us the average treatment effect. But we are very interested in how long does the impact last. So based on that, we're going to further improve our model by adding a series of time dummy variables. So right now we can track the treatment effect for every bi-week number. And we further improve that, the DID model by using a matching method so that we can find the most balanced control sample in the control area. So we use 2 methods, genetic matching and the nearest neighbor matching. And let me show how does that work. So before I get to the summary statistic, let's show where is our control and treatment group. So the Toledo water crisis happens in the Toledo region here. So any household in this dark area, they will receive water supply from Toledo. So they will affected by the water advisory. Where we find the control group from here. this is the Cleveland metropolitan city. It's also a metropolitan city in Ohio, and it's also adjacent to Lake Erie. So they actually share similar characteristics in many sense. But the great thing is, Cleveland, they never experienced harmful algal bloom. So generally, the harmful algal bloom in Lake Erie will start here. So in the southwest region of Lake Erie. So this setting actually give us a very nice natural experiment setting. And let's see how does the results show. So we compare since we are applying DID, so we compare the difference between the treatment and the control group. So let's first focus on the results before matching. So you can see the standardized mean difference between the treatment and control group actually are quite large. After we apply the nearest neighbor matching or genetic matching, you can see the difference decreased a lot, especially the genetic matching. So the genetic matching actually is our preferred model, and we combine the genetic matching and the DID and try to estimate the averting expenditure. So yeah, first of all, the result session is we're gonna check whether our estimation satisfy the parallel time trend, which is the fundamental assumption of the DID. So we examine whether there is a significant difference between the control group and treatment group before the crisis within this region. So overall, from the figure, you can see they roughly follow the same pattern, but there is a slightly different. So we tested them statistically. Luckily, we found no significant difference between the treatment and control group. Whether we use matching or non-matching, there's no significant difference. So it passed. And then let's move to the results. So this table gives us the estimation using DID, nearest neighbor matching DID, and genetic matching DID under different specifications and with different study periods. So we primarily look at this one, the genetic DID matching under a 6 bi-week study period. So you can see we found a significance here for the interaction term for the treatment, 1.2. So this number means for each household after the water crisis, they're gonna spend $1.2 for 2 weeks to buy bottled water because they don't trust their tap water. They think it's contaminated by the harmful algal bloom. Although the government says it's already safe enough after 3 days, but you can see households don't trust them. But this only gives us the average treatment effect. So we're gonna look at the time variant DID and track how many weeks are there and people are really reacting. So you can see the by week 60, which is the event happening, people spend $2.8 there. And in the second 5 weeks, you see people are still spending like around $1 per household for 2 weeks to buy bottled water. And this significance is here in the third following 5 weeks. So overall, you can see for following a 3-day water advisory, household would avert their behavior for about a month. Imagine that it's only 3 days, but people will keep reacting to the event for a month. So let me conclude here. We can see households do react to the drinking water contamination caused by the harmful algal bloom, and their averting behavior will extend significantly beyond the event itself, but the magnitude will decline over time. And to sum up, for the household, following the Toledo water crisis, per household gonna spend about $2.6 up to $4 following that safety event, and those 3-day events totally cost Toledo household about $600,000. It's only a 3-day event. And we also note that we only give the lower bound of the total averting expenditure estimation, as we do not consider other potential water sources like during the crisis. National Guard will also deliver the bottled water to the household. It's not recorded in the Nielsen IQ data. But we don't find any substitution effect for other packaged beverages like Coke, soda, juice. No, households are just a substitute to the bottled water for drinking water. And we don't find any spillover effect in the surrounding areas, only the Toledo metropolitan region. So given that the harmful algal blooms are happening more frequently, more intensively, but there's no regulation on monitoring them in the public water systems, household would stand to great welfare loss because of that. Yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you. Any question?
Do you have any idea on the magnitude of how much water was delivered to the region? Because that $800,000 seems really small.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, like, if you had a sense of how much water, like if you were to price out how much water was delivered and think about like, what would that add to that $800,000? Because it just seems really big.
Yeah. I thought you are one of our reviewers. We actually received the same questions. Yeah, that's a very great question. Yes, since this, I can answer this question from two ways. First is the Nielsen IQ data. It records the household purchase data for every week, but some data are missing out there, like the household want to record their purchase every week. So actually we are getting missing data out there. So there's already a missing data there. And the second part is, yes, the household can get a lot of water alternatives during the crisis, the National Guard, and they also can get clean water from the fire stations. Yes, but the reason why we still estimate that is we try to identify and verify there is a linkage between the household behavior to the harmful algal bloom induced cases. There's a linkage there. We know it's a very lower bound, but we do find a significance here. And if we have more detailed data, like survey data, we would love that, but that's the best we can do. We also check the news, local news. We found out they don't have an exact number of how many bottled water they deliver to the household, but they only deliver for 3 days during advisory. So actually, after the event itself, actually, the Nielsen IQ data quite give us a good indication of the household water expenditure. So you can say, although it's only 3 days, but we also found significant in the second bi-week. So it's still the behavior continue for a longer time. But that's a great question. I still cannot find a perfect answer to that, but we will work on that. Thank you.
So in comparison to the other water crises,
Mhm.
I mean, so obviously this is a temporary event, but other temporary events we have long-term.
Yeah.
And so do you have any indication or understanding of why it's this short? Like it is significant that it lasts longer than the 3 days.
Yeah.
It seems to taper off fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's a great point. The reason is it has to be a short event because those toxins, it's a very serious issue. Like when you drink them or like touch them, you have very serious illness afterwards. So once they detect that, they will try their best to solve the problem. So the Toledo declared a state of emergency because they detect a high level of toxins. So it has to be a short one. For other, I know there is some water violations in terms of like different water quality issues. They can be a long-term effect, but it's not a very serious issue. Like you can, our body can take them for a longer time, but it's not serious issue. But this toxin, no, you cannot stand that. So it has to be a short one.
Because you think the public really understands that.
Yeah. It's a serious issue.
Do you think it's valid?
Yeah, no, you can't touch them. Yeah, so every summer when you go to the beach or some lakes, you will see they do not swim because there is some kind of harmful algal bloom. So you can't go boating, go swimming there.
Well, that's not true.
Yeah.
In the house.
But there's no current regulation of detecting those toxins. There's a study like last year, they found out like a lot of manager of the public water system, they have no way to deal with the algal toxin because there's no regulation for them or no rules for them to follow. So yeah, I think I took my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Hiroshi, let me make you a presenter. Unless you're already, are you able to do screen share?
Yes, for sure.
We'll stop share on this end. Okay, you ought to be able to do a screen share now. Let me know. Excellent. We can see.
Yep. Great. And I'm afraid I can't hear the questions from the floor clearly, so I'm going to have to ask people who have question to use the mic, or I don't know if you could, if Henry, you could repeat the question for me. Okay, can I start now?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, okay, yeah.
Yeah, feel free to start and we'll make sure that we can do the questions at the end.
Yes, thank you. So thank you very much for coming today for the energy paper presentation session. I'm Hiroshi Matsushima. I'll be graduating the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign soon and will be a postdoc at New York University this fall. And I'm really excited to present this paper estimating medium direct rebound effects of the CAFE standard, which is a joint work with my advisor, Dr. Madhu Khanna. So before getting down to the content of the paper, let me walk you through a couple of important concepts in this paper. The first, this paper estimates the fuel economy rebound effect, which is based on the elasticity of annual vehicle miles traveled with respect to a 1% increase in fuel economy. And arguably, rebound effect is one of the most important economic concepts in evaluating evaluating the effectiveness and efficiency of energy efficiency standards. So a long list of studies have estimated the fuel economy rebound effects, and the estimates fall in a range between 0% and 40%, with an average of 14% rebound effect. And another important concept is the corporate average fuel economy standard, often referred to as the CAFE standard, which was introduced in 1979 in the United States. And since the design and the mechanism of the CAFE standard is really, really complicated, I will abstract away from that sort of complication and I'll give you a brief concepts of this, how this CAFE standard works. So under the CAFE standard, automakers are required to raise the sales-weighted average fuel economy of the vehicle lineup above the standard level. And importantly, the CAFE standard underwent a historic revision in 2012 with an introduction of new regulatory design and increasing stringency. And the new regulatory design is such that larger vehicles are subject to more lenient standards and smaller vehicles are subject to more stringent standard. And this will make a lot of difference in terms of automakers' compliance strategy. So this paper is motivated by the stark difference in the trends in the trade-off between average fuel economy and acceleration, which is shown in the left-hand side figure. So the vertical axis denotes the acceleration performance in terms of the horsepower to weight ratio, and the horizontal axis denotes the fuel economy in terms of MPG, miles per gallon, for light trucks and passenger cars. So movement to the north indicates the vehicle become more powerful in terms of acceleration, and the movements to the east indicate vehicles become more fuel efficient. And as we can see, both for both types of vehicles, fuel economy improved between 1979 and 1985, and between 2005 to 2016. And acceleration improved between 1986 or 1982 and 2005. And notice that when either acceleration or fuel economy improved, the other barely improved or even slightly decreased, except for trucks after 2005. And the right-hand side figure shows the historical development of the CAFE standard for light trucks and passenger cars. And comparing these figures, we find that fuel economy improved when during the CAFE standard was raised. Okay, so before before the mid 1980s and after the mid 2000s. So observing that the CAFE standard has driven fuel economy improvement, and fuel economy improvements are highly related to acceleration performance and other performance, I will explain later. We are going to answer two main research questions. The first, we investigate if the fuel economy rebound effect is offset by the degree of changes in other vehicle qualities, such as acceleration or torque or vehicle weight, which refer to as quality adjustment effects. And for example, if fuel economy is increased by sacrificing acceleration or other vehicle quality, then consumers may be less willing to drive longer, which would lead to smaller rebound effects. And second, we compare the degree of such quality adjustment effects under the two regimes of the CAFE standard before and after 2012. As I briefly mentioned in the previous slides, the new regulatory design was implemented in 2012. So we expect to see a different degree of this quality adjustment under the two regimes of the standard. So let me just briefly explain how the new mechanism works. So the new mechanism is intended to preempt the automaker's incentive to utilize the quality adjustment in raising the fuel economy. So we expect to find a smaller quality adjustment under the new standards, because under the new standard, manufacturers don't have to utilize the quality adjustment in raising the fuel economy compared to the original or pre-2012 regime of the standard. And by addressing these two questions, we contribute to the literature by breaking one of the strongest empirical assumptions that the fuel economy is increased without degrading other vehicle attributes. And we also compare the fuel economy rebound effects net of the quality adjustment effect before and after 2012, which facilitates a more accurate cost-benefit evaluation of the CAFE standard. So the literature has estimated the fuel economy rebound effects, but almost all the estimates are for example, ceteris paribus based estimates, which means that the fuel economy rebound estimates are obtained by holding other vehicle attributes constant. This is just the regression, the econometric constraint. So regressing VMT demand function and obtain a coefficient and evaluate a coefficient, which basically leads us to a ceteris paribus based evaluation of the coefficient. So most recently, Gillingham emphasized that breaking this holding vehicle attributes constant assumption is one of the most important frontier in the rebound estimates. And he also emphasized that changes in vehicle. Yeah, he also emphasized that any rebound estimates holding vehicle attributes constant will yield biased estimates. And this is the most important empirical evidence offered by West et al. In 2017. This is the only existing empirical evidence that the quality adjustment effect totally offset the fuel economy rebound effect. They carry out regression discontinuity analysis and found a 0% net rebound effect in Texas in 2009 and 2010. In the context of the CAFE standard, Anderson and Salih conclude that to the extent that the new standard, the new regulatory design of the CAFE standard neutralize the incentive to sacrifice vehicle quality when improving the fuel economy, the quality adjustment effect will diminish. So this suggests that we will find a smaller quality adjustment effect, as I noted in our research question. And most recently, Laird et al. Find that under the new CAFE standard, automakers still utilize the quality trade-offs in improving fuel economy. So we will see if this is true or not using our empirical model. So our empirical strategy is based on the theoretical framework offered by West et al. In 2017. They show that a fuel economy rebound effect obtained by holding other vehicle attributes constant is likely to overestimate the VMT elasticity when vehicle quality trade-off exists. This figure shows the inverse demand function, inverse DMT demand curve, and suppose this blue line is the status quo, and then the demand function, the demand for the VMT is assumed to be determined by the first argument, which is the cost, the per mile fuel cost, and the second argument, which is the vehicle quality that is correlated with fuel economy and some household demographic characteristics. And suppose fuel economy increases from MPG 0 to MPG 1, which suggests that the per mile fuel cost decreases. Then if we estimate the VMT demand function and evaluate the fuel cost rebound effect holding other vehicle quality constant, then we find the VMT increases from VMT 0 to VMT 1 along the same VMT demand curve. On the other hand, if we find that fuel economy increase entails degrading other vehicle quality, then the true VMT demand curve shifts inward to this red line. Then at this new per mile fuel cost level, the VMT increases from VMT 0 to VMT 1 prime, not VMT 1. So the difference between VMT 1 and VMT 1 prime is the quality adjustment effect, which is due to the shift of this VMT demand curve. So separately identifying the movement along the VMT demand curve and the shift of the VMT demand curve is essential in evaluating the quality adjustment effect. And in the identification, we utilize important institutional knowledge, which is that vehicle attributes change almost only at the timing of vehicle remodeling, which takes place every 4 to 6 years. These figures show the year-on-year % change in fuel economy and horsepower for vehicles that were continued from previous years and those that were remodeled in each year. As you can see, for continued vehicle models, we do not observe any percentage changes in the fuel economy and horsepower. On the other hand, we observe double-digit % changes at the timing of remodeling for those vehicles that were remodeled. And this timing of remodeling is also suggestive in evaluating a policy-relevant fuel economy elasticity. And this is the stylized chart showing how fuel economy evolves over time at the timing of remodeling. The generation 1 is introduced before the new CAFE standard was introduced. then the fuel economy of the model remained the same as we saw in the previous slides. Then the model underwent remodeling and the fuel economy improved by this degree. In the same way, the model underwent the next remodeling after this new CAFE standard was implemented. So in terms of evaluating the effect of the CAFE, different regimes of CAFE standard, only this generation 3 is affected by the new CAFE standard. This suggests that by utilizing remodeling as a source of variation, we can compare the effect of the CAFE standard before and after the new design was introduced. Based on these considerations, we estimate the fuel economy rebound effect in 2 steps. In the first step, we regress log of VMT on gas prices and average per mile fuel cost of other vehicles within the same household for multi-vehicle households, and sets of demographic controls and vehicle model by model year fixed effect. And the beta 1 identifies the movement along the VMT demand curve, and a beta 2 identifies the within household substitution effect. So the weighted average of beta 1 and beta 2 over the share of multi-vehicle household yields the household level fuel cost elasticity of VMT, which corresponds to the movement along the VMT demand curve at the household level. And this Xi-JT is the VMT associated with each vehicle by model year, which serves as the vehicle quality index in terms of natural log of VMT. Then in the second step, we regress Xi-JT hat on the log of fuel economy and the vehicle generation. And we also interact these variables with after after variable, which is an indicator variable, which takes a value of 1 if the vehicle model was produced after 2012. And we use the 2017 National Household Travel Survey as our main data set, which contains almost 200,000 vehicle models with detailed household demographic information. So this is a result of the first step estimation result, estimation. And we estimate the 4 different specifications depending on the inclusion of different types of fixed effects. So the column 4 is the most preferable specification, which includes survey quota fixed effect, vehicle model by model year fixed effects, and household demographics fixed effect, and also a primary driver demographics fixed effect, as well as the household demographics by vehicle class, by vehicle brand fixed effect. And as I said, we take the weighted average of these beta 1 or beta 2, and we obtain the fuel economy elasticity of VMT at 0.089. And also the sign of beta 1 or beta 2 are consistent with the economic theory, which is that when gas price increases, consumers drive less. And when the fuel cost of other vehicles within a household increases, then the household drive this particular vehicle more. So this is the positive coefficient. So these are consistent with what economic theory predicts. And this is the result of the second stage estimation. And these are these are grouped for 2 types. So 1, vehicle quality adjusted, and group 2, not quality adjusted. And these are differentiated by the inclusion of performance attributes. So group 2 includes, for example, acceleration, torque, and weight as observed vehicle performance related vehicle attributes. So in the interpretation of this MPG for this first group, which doesn't include the performance, is the increase in MPG, which involves trade-offs with other vehicle qualities such as performance, acceleration, and vehicle torque. And this is the MPG increase, which is deemed a pure technology improvement without sacrificing other, for example, acceleration and torque. And this generation shows the effect of remodeling on the shift of the VMT demand curve. And as we can see, a 1% increase in fuel economy is associated with a 0.46% shift of VMT before 2011, and a slightly lower VMT shift after 2012. And vehicle remodeling is associated with a negative 2.72% shift of VMT before 2011, and slightly greater positive VMT shift after 2012. But these figures are not straightforward to interpret in terms of the degree of elasticity or rebound effect. So I translate the values into the rebound effect term, and I show the rebound effect for cars, trucks, and all before 2012 and after for fuel cost rebound effect and quality adjustment effect. So fuel cost rebound effect is the movement along the demand curve, which was 8.9%. And the quality adjustment effect is this, and this is the total net effect of fuel economy rebound effect. So quality adjustment offset the fuel economy rebound effect by 9.2 percentage point before 2011, resulted in a negative 0.3% net fuel economy rebound effect. And this quality adjustment reduced to 2 percentage points after 2012, and the net fuel economy rebound effect was 6.2% after 2012. And the quality adjustment effect was larger for trucks before 2011, which was 10. So the quality adjustment effect for trucks offset the fuel cost rebound effect by 10.6 percentage point. So this is the difference between quality adjusted fuel rebound effect and quality unadjusted fuel rebound effect, which shows the degree of overestimation of the fuel economy rebound effect by failing to account for the quality adjustment. So the figures show that failing to account for the quality change resulted in overestimation of the true fuel economy rebound effect by as much as 11 percentage points before 2012, before 2011, and overestimation by 3.1 percentage points after 2012. So the results are these. So we find 0% fuel economy rebound effect before 2011, which supports the only existing empirical evidence offered by West et al. And we find 6.9% net fuel economy rebound effect after 2012. And the vehicle quality adjustment effect was stronger before 2011 than after 2012, because this before CAFE standard did not allow the before CAFE standard implicitly required automakers to take advantage of the quality trade-off in raising the fuel economy. And the quality adjustments effect was stronger for trucks than the cars before 2011, and failing to account for the quality change result in an overestimation of the true fuel economy rebound effect. And from these results, we can derive some policy implications. The first, the 14% fuel economy rebound effect that economists agree on appears to be slightly large. And also the CAFE standard for trucks of the new regime of the standard appears to be too lenient. This is it. Thank you so much. So if you have any questions, any comments and questions would be appreciated. Thanks so much.
I think the question you can just speak up or maybe go somewhat close to the mic and work. I would ask, Hiroshi, you mentioned that it's crucial to distinguish movements along the VMT demand curve from a shift in the VMT demand curve. Did the need to distinguish that, did that play into your model specification, how it was designed? What were some of the considerations there?
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to hear.
Sorry, can you not hear?
Yep. I'm sorry.
Is that better?
Yes, much better.
Oh, so you mentioned that it's crucial to distinguish shifts along the VMT demand curve from movements, shifts in the curve versus movements along the curve.
Yes.
And so I was curious if you could speak to some of the needing to be able to distinguish that. What were some of the considerations for the design of your model?
Yes. So in evaluating the effectiveness and efficiency of the CAFE standard, the cost-benefit analysis is widely used, and the degree of rebound effect, field economy rebound effect, is one of the crucial assumptions in such cost-benefit analysis. So if we overestimate the rebound effect in the cost-benefit analysis, we overestimate the cost or underestimate the benefit of the standard. And the reason why this distinction is important in evaluating the CAFE standard is that, as we saw, the CAFE standard affect vehicle quality quite differently, as we saw. So improvement in the fuel economy can degrade other performance, such as acceleration. So we can't evaluate the effect of the standard correctly if we hold other vehicle characteristics constants. If we hold other vehicle characteristics constants, it means that we evaluate the pure zero cost technology addition. So this is important. And in the empirical section, we distinguish the two by separately identifying this VMT by this beta 1 and this Xi-J. So beta 1 is the correlation identified by correlation between the fuel cost and the VMT. So this is only relevant to the gas price, so which is irrelevant of the vehicle characteristics. So all the VMT factors is subsumed into this vehicle model by model VFX effect. So in the second step, we estimate this vehicle quality index in terms of VMT, in terms of log of VMT on these vehicle characteristics and vehicle generation to estimate the shift.
Excellent. Thank you, Hiroshi. And I don't think there are any other questions. So thanks a lot for your presentation.
Thanks so much. I wish I were there and present in person, but thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. All right. So let me share. I'll be last. Hiroshi, just let me know if you can't see my screen.
I can see your slides.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I'll be presenting my master's thesis today, which I just filed recently to graduate, and which my thesis advisors want to work with me to potentially publish as I move on to my PhD program. So I'm excited for any feedback or questions. So we'll go through the background data, methods, finding, and discussion. I'll go through the data and the methods fairly quickly so that we can, for the time constraints, so we can get to the findings. The two methodologies that I primarily use are environmental input-output models, which I'll call EIO, and just mathematical programming. So one of my optimization problems is just a simple linear programming problem, and then a nonlinear programming problem. But I'll briefly look at the EIO output as something that isn't my primary contribution, but I'm taking that output and using it in my optimization problem. So for the background, the IPCC target, or the IPCC has a target of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees increase from pre-industrial times. And if we don't meet that target, there are many well-documented negative consequences. For the US national economy to be IPCC consistent would be to reduce emissions 51% below 2005 levels by 2030. My base year is 2012, so I look at a 44% reduction below 2012 in emissions by 2030. And my research question is, to remain consistent with the IPCC target, what primary energy input changes are required in the US food system's electricity use? That segment specifically. And my objectives were to identify the IPCC consistent energy mix for the food system and identify the largest emission sources. And based off the data I have available, we can look at the largest sources by energy type, by supply chain stage, and by the food category. I'll just do energy type and supply chain stage today. So the US economy in 2012 generated 6,500 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions, of which the food system generated 1,300 MMT, about 20%, of which just over a third was due to energy, 472 MMT, and 56% of food system energy comes from electricity. So, and this number isn't actually used in my paper, but just to give a sense of the magnitude, this means about, food system electricity emissions is 264 million metric tons, or 4% of the national total. So it's a sizable chunk that's in scope. And so what does the food system mean? The agri-food system category includes agriculture. This is more commonly tracked, but as part of this wider definition, as well as agriculture, you think about land use change. This could be deforestation, and then pre and post-production activities. This would be anything that's occurring along the supply chain. So all the inputs into agriculture, into food production, as well as transportation, wholesale, retail, everything after the farm gate, post-farm gate. Relevant literature. I consider relevant literature to be other papers that have used environmental input-output models, EIO models. And Hendry et al. Did so, or using EIO models to look at food system emissions. And Hendry et al. Did so in Australia, Kamanzi et al. In the EU. And then there are a number of papers in the US, and the one that I draw most heavily on was the paper from my thesis advisor. This is Patrick Canning et al. 2022. And I use their model and their output as data into my optimization problem. And whereas all of these papers look at food demand and thinking, how do we change diets to reduce emissions? I hold food demand fixed and think about how do we change the production side, so change energy inputs to reduce emissions. I focus on the supply side, and I use that EIO output as data input into my optimization problem, another parameter. So what do I get from the EIO model? We have electricity use, billion BTUs by along 3 dimensions: energy types, supply chain stage, and food category. And then I combine that with other parameters, the actual and projected energy growth. This acts as in the optimization problem, this acts as an upper bound. So you can't increase to meet the emissions target. You can't just increase solar an unreasonable amount. It's bounded above by the projections coming from the EIA, Energy Information Administration. And it's also bounded from below by depreciation numbers. So you can't eliminate coal tomorrow or petroleum. You can just reduce them at the rate of depreciation. There are also life cycle assessment emissions factors. This attributes emissions to each energy type. And then the levelized cost of electricity attributes cost to each energy type. So first for LCA, there's ample literature about this as a methodology, which I won't go into, but the key thing is that it considers emissions across the entire life cycle of a certain energy type. So solar, for instance, is not zero emissions. Solar is one of the more polluting renewable energy. It's here you can see it's 12,000 grams CO2e per million BTU. The most polluting energy source is going to be coal, of course, followed by natural gas or followed by oil, petroleum, and then natural gas. The least polluting sources, according to these LCA numbers from NREL, are wind, nuclear, and hydropower. For projections, I have, because my base year is 2012, I had the actual what actually occurred from 2012 to 2021, and then what is projected to occur from 2021 to 2030. And this very top row, you can see coal declined 40%, and it's projected to decline another 28% through 2030. Solar, on the other hand, increased from 2012 to 2021. Solar increased over 2,000%. It was negligible, and so it's starting from a small base, and it's projected to increase another 250%. Depreciation, again, this provides a lower bound, so you can't just eliminate the fossil fuels altogether. For levelized cost of electricity, like LCA, there's a lot of literature about this methodology. The key thing is that it considers the cost across the entire lifetime of a power plant, and it allows you to compare different types of energy that have different lifespans. The cheapest energy source, according to this, is natural gas, followed by wind, followed by nuclear. The most expensive are petroleum and coal, and these numbers come from the International Energy Agency, the IEA, and IRENA. So on to methods. This matrix here shows the key output from my EIO model, and this is electricity use by energy, stage, and food. So we have across the top, we have coal, hydropower, natural gas, etc., the energy types. Down the rows, we have supply chain stage, so agribusiness, crops, livestock, food processing, transportation, and more. And then food categories, poultry, fish. This matrix would continue on for many rows. There are 28 categories. I won't focus on food today, just supply chain and energy type. But this is the full matrix. And then to get from electricity use to emissions, I just multiply that electricity use by an emissions factor. But for the optimization model, I aggregate this up. So I get the totals by energy type, coal, hydropower, and so on. And when I do that aggregation, we have a diagram like this. This is 2012 electricity use by the US food system. And so there were total electricity use by the food system in 2012 was 7 billion BTUs or 7 quads. And the largest provider of that electricity was coal, 3 quads, followed by natural gas, 1.7 quads, followed by nuclear, 1.5. And then the largest renewable energy provider was hydropower, followed by wind, solar, really small amount, which is why we see that large percent increase. For emissions, the key thing here is that Coal is a really disproportionate amount of emissions, everything on the right-hand side. For supply chain stages, and let me go back here. We have, for supply chain stages, the stage that uses the most electricity is utilities partition, 2.8 quads, followed by food service, 1.8 quads, followed by food processing. And when we go to looking at emissions, it's directly proportional because all of these supply chain stages are assumed to be getting the same energy mix as if they're using the one utility. But the different energy sources are going to have different emissions intensity factors. So coal is 42% of the electricity, accounting for 76% of the emissions. Natural gas is the 21%, and then everything else is just 2% and change in terms of emissions. For now, that was 2012. My optimization, my objective functions in my optimization problem are going to be to minimize cost. And this is the minimizing cost is the choice variable, which is electricity by energy type in 2030 times cost, and then to minimize change. And this is the choice variable, electricity in 2030 minus the baseline electricity squared over the baseline electricity. The idea of change minimization is to say that we want to have the least disruption to the current energy system while still meeting these constraints on emissions. And the objective functions, both objective functions are subject to the same constraints. There's an emissions constraint, so this is meeting the IPCC target. There's a total energy constraint. The food system has to use a certain amount of energy to actually produce that food. 3 lower bounds. These are the depreciation lower bounds on the fossil fuels, and then an upper bound that applies to all of the fuels. And so what do we find? The most important finding that I had, the principal finding, was that under the EIA projections, well, these are the 2012 emissions. That is 1,000 million metric tons. Here's the EIA or the IPCC target is 642 million metric tons. If energy grows in the way that the EIA projects, we're going to exceed the IPCC target. That would be 730 MMT. And so in order to get for this my problem to solve, I had to incrementally increase the EIA energy projection. So relax that upper bound. Say if the EIA projects that wind is going to grow 20%, I would make it 21%. I would add a percentage point, then 22%, and so on up until I added 8 percentage points. And I did so for all energy types, even adding percentage points to those energy types that are projected to decline, like coal. And when I do that, I get, once I add 8 percentage points, I first get a feasible solution for the change minimization problem that exactly equals the target being 642 million metric tons. And then for cost minimization, I get an outcome 632 MMT that's slightly lower, and we'll see why. But because the solution's just feasible, these 2 different objective functions yield nearly identical results. And this is a diagram of what it would be like in 2030, according to the cost minimization solution. Natural gas becomes the largest supplier of electricity. That's 2.4 quads, followed by nuclear at 1.5, followed by wind. So now renewable energy is one of the largest providers of electricity. Then coal is still 4th, and solar is 5th, but solar's increased quite a bit. And in terms of the percentage change, I have, this is percentage change. Solar and wind have their own graphs because the axes, the growth has been so large. I have the EIA projection as the red square. The blue triangle is cost minimization. The purple circle is change minimization. And in most cases, the two objective functions are giving results in the same direction. So for nuclear, natural gas, hydropower, geothermal, and biomass, my solutions are having increasing these fuels more than what the EIA projects. So the EIA has one projection, and in order to meet this emissions target, they have to increase more than what the EIA projects. On the other hand, coal needs to decrease more than what the EIA projects. For solar, my two objective functions yielded opposite results. Cost minimization increases more than the EIA, and this is because solar is a relatively lower cost fuel, but change minimization does not increase it as much as what the EIA would project. And that's because it represents a more significant change from what the existing energy system, how it functions. But otherwise, the two optimization problems yield this, very similar results. And then here's a look at emissions. So natural gas becomes the largest emitter, followed by coal. Coal's the fourth largest generator of electricity under this scenario, but the second largest emitter. And those two categories still represent the overwhelming majority. This is about 94% of emissions, and then everything else represents the rest. Solar is the third largest category. So as far as renewables go, it's a more emissions intensive fuel. Okay, so my findings suggest, first and foremost, that to remain consistent with the 1.5 degree Celsius target, relative to the EIA projections, there would be, we need to have greater reductions in coal are required, greater increases in renewable energy, electricity. This is specific to the food system. But then, you know, my model is only going through 2030. And if you look to 2050 and you think about net zero, it's obvious that you would need to decarbonize those non-fossil fuel energies, those supply chains, because there are emissions embedded in all of them: solar, wind, hydro, etc. And also, you know, likely needing negative emission strategies, and then ultimately reducing natural gas in addition to coal, even though my results show that natural gas would be the biggest provider of electricity for the US food system. Some limitations. Let me check time. So I'll wrap this up, and then we can have questions. So some model limitations that are options for future research, and that I'll be working with my advisors on. My focus is limited to the supply side, even though in reality you'd want to say we want to adjust diets as well as adjusting the supply side. You know, we eat less meat to reduce these emissions. I have this uniform increase for all energy sources to yield a feasible solution. So I just say there's no solution with the EIA numbers, so increase every single source by the same amount. Constant parameters over the period of analysis. So LCOE, life cycle CO2e, those are constant. And then it's impossible to reach net zero by 2050 with my model, because there are no we don't model negative emissions, and there's constant life cycle emissions instead of having declining life cycle emissions with innovation. So for future research, I'll be looking to work with my advisor on developing some supply functions. So instead of just increasing the amount that energy can increase, have supply functions that say, okay, if you go beyond the EIA projections, that can be modeled with an energy supply function. And then making some of these other parameters dynamic, so they change over time, and then modeling negative emissions. And I'll leave it there so we can have questions.
How are we going to do the second point? I think that important. You know, if they're going to reduce by we mentioned the demand, but in addition to changing diets, I think it's even more importantly, is marginal cost increase by things.
Mm.
Even the energy demand is constant, with every the prices go up.
Mhm.
Something like that. So that effect already will decrease some of the carbon emissions, right? So I think
Oh,
what
yeah.
now is you have a constraint and you have to produce this much stuff, this much more,
Mhm.
with less carbon. Less production. Finding out least costly way to produce this much corn, because that's what we use now. But if you, in reality, if you produce corn in a more expensive way, with renewable, marginal costs go up, prices go up, the consumption goes down.
Yeah.
So that change in consumption already has a negative effect on, by itself, has a negative effect on, carbon. So that effect could be obtained, for example, by a carbon tax,
Mhm.
or making things more expensive.
Yeah, yes, and so that's something that would also be the potential for future research would be looking at how after these changes on the supply side, these changes which are going to mean that the cost of producing the food goes up potentially, likely. How does that filter through back to the demand side?
You have the next slide, you have the price effect, right? So that, I think that's what you were probably going.
Yeah.
The question is, how are you going to have demand functions for each commodity? How about the commodity? How do you do that?
There are well, this is something to explore.
Yeah. I mean, the model would become pretty big.
Yeah.
Like, we can call it a huge model for all the commodities we use.
Okay. Yeah.
If you want to try to do that. He's retired, you may become very smart.
Yeah.
It's ambitious. I mean, what you're done is already great, especially for market.
Yeah.
Demand functions for every commodity.
Would be,
Somehow you could have it.
yeah. But that, yeah, so that would, I guess that would be a something to think about. So it'd be really significant work, it sounds like. This input output models already aggregate up quite a bit. And so you just have something like poultry, meat, grains, and the model I was working with had just 28 categories, 28 food categories. So it's really highly aggregated data.
So you can have 28 demand functions.
Yeah, I guess that's still quite a bit. Yeah.
That's really, you know,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, otherwise, if you don't account for the price of that, all the econ don't know this,
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's kind of it's impressive. It's both like an engineering kind of a strong level. I'm going to find at least popular position or even this object. But the economic mechanism, the price is reducing.
Yeah.
People find this the most important part.
Indeed.
Can you go back here, what's the change, the change minimization objective function? That was pretty-
Here it was. So this is the choice variable is P1 minus the baseline. This would be electricity use by energy source 2012, electricity use by energy source in 2030, difference those and then square it so that we have a positive number over the 2012.
Does that explain why the solar one is all, is by, compared to your other, so in your result, the solar result is the one that's most swirly, right, so compared to the cost minimization?
Yes.
It's no different from the cost minimization.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's because, as we know, right, solar has exploded, and so it's from such a small base. And so, like, if you want to minimize change in solar, it's just not gonna be-
That's exactly right. So that's what's happening here. I mean, already, this is the growth from 2012 to 2021, what actually occurred, and then from 2021 to 2030, the projected growth, it's over 9,000%. The change minimization is still a huge amount, but it's less than the EIA, over 8,000% increase. And this is just because it's more of a change from the existing energy system, which is why the change minimization objective function doesn't increase solar as much, and the cost minimization up here increases solar more because it's less costly. All right.
You know, in California, a big chunk of electricity use, probably more than half, is for something more than a lot of.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's really huge. So, you know. I think that's probably more detailed.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
Yeah, it's a huge industry. It's also a really big consumer of water.
Yeah, I mean, the pump they can afford, right?
Yeah.
Serious, significant chunk of electricity is pumping water.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. That concludes our session. Thanks for the feedback.
Sorry about that.
Don't
Very
apologize.
good.
Don't apologize, you know, I get excited.
I'm especially excited to learn.
Thanks, Hiroshi.
To see how you should help me. Oh, it's coming.
Thank you, Henry.